I've made a video game. It's that time of year when Mariah Carey leans back in her chair and cashes in those big fat royalty checks. But as much as retail workers across the world are suffering a festive assault on their hearing, why aren't there any good Christmas games? Is it possible to make one? In fact, is it possible to make one and rip off The Legend of Zelda at the same time? Well, let's talk game design. This game is like a perfect storm of ideas that I'd had. First of all, I felt like entering a game jam, and the most intriguing one that I found at the time was Major Jam 3. For those of you that don't know, a game jam is a timed event where multiple participants try and create a game that complies with certain limitations. They're a great way to try out new ideas, learn new skills, actually finish a project, and most importantly, procrastinate from what you're meant to be doing. Major Jam 3 required entrants to make a game with a maximum resolution of 96 pixels by 96 pixels. For reference sake, please look at my very standard 1080p desktop wallpaper. 96 by 96 is this. This sounds terrifyingly hard, right? Actually, no. Being so limited in size means that there's no room for my art to spiral out of control. Yes, it'll still look like a blind three-legged dog ran through a paint spill and started doing donuts on a white-tiled floor, but at least it's a small floor. There's also an optional theme of retro. At a resolution this small, I don't know how they can call that theme optional, because surely anything you can produce is going to look old. But let's embrace it. I've also wanted to make a Christmas game. Other than a few outliers like that recent Pumpkin Jack platformer from Halloween, national holidays don't seem to get as many games released for them as there are Christmas movies. The best examples I can think of are Christmas Nights into Dreams, movie tie-ins like Home Alone and Die Hard, or the bastion of quality and family fun that is Elf Bowling. Marvellous. And finally, another thing I've wanted to try out for a while is a Zelda clone. Now, I don't mean taking inspiration from Breath of the Wild, like Immortals: Phoenix Rising. I mean taking it all the way back to 1987, also known as the best and most important year in history, and going back to the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. And yes, I know the game came out in Japan in 1986, but I like being the same age as my favourite series, so please just let me have this. Right, let's get started. If you leave Zelda on the title screen, eventually the story will start scrolling up at you. So the first roadblock is that we need to have a story. This is easy, because it's a video game, and as we all know, stories in games don't actually need to be good. Zelda opens here, a big wide area with rocks everywhere and a suspicious cave ahead. We can't do a big wide area because our game is 96 pixels square, but we can do the rocks and the cave, so there we go. The game starts with Santa facing the cave in an intentional design choice, so if the player doesn't know where they're going, then I did everything I could. Next, you go into the cave and an old man says an iconic line, then gives you a stick. Technically it's a sword, but it's basically a stick. It wouldn't be very Christmassy to give Santa a sword, but he does need something to hit things with, so how about his sack? Santa gets his big old sack full of gifts for all the children and whacks things in the face with his sack. Wholesome. And rather than an old man, we'll have an old woman. His wife, in fact, Mrs. Claus. And with that, you're off. No, really, that's it. You get given a stick and a big world to wander about in and off you go. And you'll most likely wander around confused for a while and die pretty quickly, which is fine. Over the years, the Zelda series has featured dramatically varying degrees of tutorials and hand-holding, from the original game's absolutely none whatsoever, to Skyward Sword's Are You Sure You Know What a Controller Looks Like? This is where I made a brave, bold, and frankly potentially stupid decision. If I was going to emulate the tone of the original Zelda game, I was going all in. So you get nothing. Just a snowy blizzard on an empty screen and a chiptune rendition of Slade's Merry Christmas Everybody in the background. This is the part where I do something I've never had to do with one of my games before, and give you a spoiler warning. Past this point, I'll be talking about secrets, gameplay mechanics, and level design that will partially defeat the purpose of playing the game. So if you are interested, the link is in the description. Except of course it's not Link, it's Santa. If you want to give it a go, you can always come back and watch the rest of the video later. Otherwise we're going to break apart this cryptic little game in a way that might undermine the very intentional design decisions I made when putting it together. The original Zelda really does just send you off into the wilderness, and we need to talk about how and why. One reason is because what you'd normally consider a tutorial is instead listed in a relic of a bygone era, the game's manual. The manual will give you a full breakdown of the mechanics and items, as well as a step-by-step guide for how to get to the first dungeon. Side note, it's also got this hilarious bit about how to play Zelda as a multiplayer game. Take turns. I don't think that counts, but it was 1987, so we'll let them off. Another reason for the lack of signposting is that Zelda is an exploration-focused adventure game. Later entries toned this down to various degrees, but the original leaned really hard into the idea of player discovery. It's for this reason that when you die in the overworld, you're thrown back to the very first screen. Nowadays that might sound a bit archaic, but it's not as old-fashioned as you think. Anyone who's played and enjoyed Dark Souls will tell you that map familiarity, the degree to which you know and understand your environment, is a vital tool to success. Every time you get sent back to a bonfire and have to retrace your steps, you learn a little bit more about the path that you're taking, where the enemies spawn, where the choke points are, whether there are any shortcuts or hidden items. Replaying the same section over and over is an opportunity for you to get better at that smaller section, which will eventually add up to a mastery of the entire game world. And so it was with Zelda, an overworld that consisted of just 128 screens that eventually you'd commit to memory. My overworld has 10 screens. One opening screen and then a 3x3 square that loops around in a circle. My game also doesn't throw you back to the start when you die, instead you respawn right on the same screen. Both of these things are on purpose because this is a game jam game, and teachable moment, people in game jams like games that they can complete. If you've never entered a game jam before, I should explain that usually the idea is that you submit a game and then go and play other people's entries to comment, offer feedback and generally just be a nice person. What this means is you might only want to dedicate 10 or so minutes to each entry that you're playing. So the best game jam entries are those that are snappy, immediate, complete and reasonably easy while still being satisfying. Having said that, I am still emulating the original Zelda, so there's a certain degree of obfuscation and hidden complexity that I have to include if I'm going to be faithful to the source. One of these is hidden secrets. Zelda is notorious for bombable walls, but I didn't want to overcomplicate the mechanics, so instead there's a pretty obviously signposted secret where you just hit the wall with the one button that you have and unveil a whopping 50 rupees. I can't call them rupees, can I? 50 schmoopies. Now there's not much point having schmoopies, I think I'm just going to say currency. There's not much point having currency if there's nothing you can do with it. And so we go back to the original game that had shops, with this little guy telling you, quite rudely, to buy something, will you? This ties into my Christmas theme because he sounds like someone who's been listening to All I Want for Christmas Is You on repeat for an 8-hour shift and now understandably wants to strangle someone. What should we be able to buy? You know what else Zelda is known for? Art containers. You pick these up for completing optional challenges, beating bosses, and sometimes in the series you can buy them. They give you a permanent increase to your HP, which overall makes the game easier. So we'll put them in the shop. And here's where we start getting really retro. In the first Zelda game, if you're at maximum health, your sword shoots a beam projectile across the whole screen. This is incredibly helpful in the early game and trying to beat Aquamentus, the first boss. I say really retro because the sword beam is a kind of haphazard inclusion in the Zelda series. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Right now, for Santa, it is. But we're modernising it and making it so that once you've bought the power-up, which I've cleverly replaced with candy canes, you can fire it whenever you like, regardless of if you've got full health or not. This means it doubles up as another Zelda staple, the bow and arrow. In the first game, although you get the bow as a free pickup inside the first dungeon, it doesn't do anything until you buy, I guess, the rights to own arrows for 80 rupees. Sounds like a good price, doesn't it? 80 schmoopies. Boom. Job done. What else have we got? Puzzles are interesting because the first game didn't feature anything more complicated than push this block, but the series eventually came to be known for its melding of puzzles and combat, so I thought we'd deviate a bit from the original and put in a very basic puzzle. The bottom of the map is the entrance to the boss's lair, but when you start the game, it's blocked off by these 3 blocks. Dotted around the map are 3 switches, each with a little indicator in front of them that has a different number of dots on. These switches have to be activated in order, and then the blocks will vanish and you can go and take on the boss. If you try and activate them out of order, they all reset and you need to start from the beginning. If the game wasn't 10 screens large, this might be really frustrating since you're wandering around in circles looking for the right number of dots. But because it's a tiny game world, it's fine. And that brings us neatly to the last thing that I ripped verbatim from The Legend of Zelda. Over the years, the bosses in Zelda have evolved into something puzzly that has more to do with the scope and scale of the fight you're in than the actual skill involved in beating them. The trope of hitting a weak point 3 times to win is almost entirely because of the Zelda series, but I think boss battles and the purpose, advantages and drawbacks of them might be enough to ramble about for an entirely other video, so we'll stop there. No, really, we'll stop there. I'm not showing you the boss because now that I've told you all the secrets in the game and how to unlock your path there, you've got one more chance to go and play the game for yourself. But if you really don't want to, then I'll put a full playthrough at the end of the video and you can just watch that instead. Overall, I'm really happy with it. I worked on it on and off for 4 days, even though the jam ran for a week. And I think if I had the opportunity to take it further... As it turns out, I do have the opportunity to take it further. I put out a community post about the game as a little sneak peek, and this kind soul took a guess as to the jam I was entering. Turns out it wasn't that one, but I looked into it and the Great Winter Game Jam is running for about the next 2 weeks, with the theme of winter. I don't know about you, but I think a Zelda clone about Santa set in the North Pole qualifies as pretty wintry, and this whole game was made in the time that the Great Winter Game Jam has been open for submission, so it qualifies for the jam's rules, and I think I could just submit the Legend of Santa as my entry. I could do that, but I'm not going to. Instead, I think I'll spend the next couple of weeks playing Cyberpunk 2077. Instead, I think I'll spend the next couple of weeks refining and expanding on the base that I've started with, so that my entry actually has some effort put in and comes out as something I can be quite proud of. Maybe that'll deserve a video of its own, maybe it won't. Maybe I'll put it up as a community post, maybe I won't. Who knows? If you want to find out, you're going to need to subscribe to the channel, and if you liked this video, you should like this video. And now, as promised, a full playthrough of my Major Jam 3 entry, The Legend of Zelda. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time I'm thinking, hey, let's talk game design.